Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 14th Masterclass of the India Forum for Nature-Based Solutions Masterclass series. I'm Shaurya and I support the Secretariat of the Forum. Before we begin, a quick introduction to the India Forum for Nature-Based Solutions and as people are joining in. The Forum is a coalition of research, practice, and finance organizations working together to scale up the adoption of NBS to shape climate resilient cities and communities across India. Through knowledge exchanges like this Masterclass series, we aim to share actionable strategies and insights that support practitioners, policymakers, and also researchers in implementing NBS on the ground. Today's masterclass explores how participatory mapping can make urban greening more strategic, inclusive, and lasting. Urban greening efforts often remain fragmented and short lived, seen more as ornamental rather than essential for resilience. As built up areas expand and natural buffers shrink, cities lose their capacity to manage heat, floods, and pollution. The Mapathon initiative offers a practical solution by combining citizen participation with spatial mapping. Mapathons help identify underused spaces for climate positive interventions like tree planting, rain gardens, or pocket parks, aligning greening efforts with city climate goals. In this session, we'll be exploring why greening often fail and what systematic gaps exist, how participatory mapping serves as a planning and decision-making tool, and also lessons from cities of Mumbai, Bengaluru, and Kochi on building data-driven, community-led greening. We'll also discuss how governments, academia, and citizens can co-own this process and institutionalize mapathons as part of city planning. We're delighted to have our speakers from WRI-India joining us today, who've been leading the work on participatory mapping and urban greening. To begin, we have Arun Manohar, who is an architect and creative researcher whose work spans regenerative urbanism, cultural identity, and social justice in public spaces. At WRI-India, Arun advances urban greening and blue-green infrastructure strategies, developing governance models and field-based protocols that make city climate action both inclusive and implementable. Next, we have Regi, who is a senior program associate at WRI-India and works on climate resilience and nature-based solutions through mapping and geospatial analysis. Blinda's work supports cities like Kochi, Mumbai, and states like Tamil Nadu in designing practical data-driven solutions for urban flooding, heat mitigation, and wash planning. We're also joined by Rohit Lahoti, who's a program manager with the urban development team at WRI-India. There were 9 years of experience across housing, blue-green infrastructure, and governance. Rohit brings a multi-dimensional approach to urban challenges, combining policy insight with field-level implementation. Completing the panel today is Sayali Lokare from WRI India's geoanalytics team. Sayali's work focuses on a framework for blue-green infrastructure and flood resilience with projects spanning Mumbai's Methi River, Nashik's urban ecosystems, and aquifer mapping. With a master's from UC Berkeley, Sally is particularly interested in using mixed method research to advance urban climate adaptation. A very warm welcome to all of you and thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping notes. We will have a dedicated Q&A segment following the presentation. So please feel free to share your questions in the Q&A box throughout the session. This session is being recorded and will be made available on YouTube. A link will also be shared with all registered participants via email. With that, let's get started. I invite Arun to take us through the work. Thank you.
Thanks, Shaurya. Knowing that my network is quite patchy sometimes, please let me know whenever I'm not audible. Rohit, can you please share the screen, please?
Yeah, Shaurya, can you stop sharing?
Thanks, Rohit. So I think Before we start into understanding what Mapathon is or how did we use this as a tool to build climate resilience, I thought we should also take a 30,000 feet, understanding of what we are really discussing. Next slide, please. So the presentation for today flows from understanding India's climate narrative. It also talks about what are the current urban greening challenges that we have across cities. And then we'll discuss about what is a Mapathon and how the three cities that we are going to present today, what are the different approaches that these cities had, given their unique challenges and opportunities that the cities have. And then we'll break into the question and answer session. Next slide, please. Next slide. So in terms of India's climate narrative, this is a very interesting vulnerability mapping that CEW had done. Basically, it shows that India is the seventh most vulnerable country when it comes to climate-induced risk. Now, even though this map has mapped only the hydrogeological, climate risk, urban heat is also a very realistic climate risk that we are all facing, and India is no exception to that as well. Given this as a context, next slide. This is how it looks like for an everyday person. Couple of years ago, climate change or a hole in the ozone were all very fictional, very distant narratives that were probably spoken in elite circles and academic institutions. But I think the years now and the years to come, climate change is a very real, imagination that is going to affect all of us here. And we are already seeing the brunt of climate change, whether it is our cities getting flooded, where every year we have a new city that is flooding. Our summers are only getting hotter every year. Next slide, please. And but then what does it really mean? It also means that out of 35 states slash union territories that India have, 27 are vulnerable to extreme climate induced disaster. 8 out of 10 Indian citizens live in districts that are very vulnerable to extreme climate event. And India's economy also has a hit because a lot of our GDP does come from informal business and organization, which are the most vulnerable and exposed to especially heat and flood. Next slide, please. But the recent study also, I think this is a study from IDMC that really tracks migration and displacement. India is the third highest, third largest country when it comes to climate-induced migration, only after China and Philippines. That really puts a lot of, perspective into the scale at which we are dealing with, climate change and everything. But how did we really get here? There are multiple, reasons for it. One, our ever expanding urban, built up space also eats a lot of open and green spaces. And that is exactly where we are going to discuss today with our Mapathon as a context, where these are some newspaper articles that talks about how India has lost more forest cover than it really gained. And as per the city master plans, each of us do have somewhere around 17.43 square meters of open space. Again, there are open spaces, not necessarily green spaces, but almost 14% of these open spaces are any which ways eaten up in the name of development across cities. Next slide, please. So just a quick question, just to understand and read the room. According to the URDPFI guideline, it specifies, a range of, open spaces for all Indian cities. Maybe if you can just type it in the chat, which of these three values do you think is the ideal open space that each Indian city is required to have as per the guidelines? Maybe we can just take a sense of how people are informed in this. But while that is happening, the next slide, please. So while that is happening, these are some of the screenshots of where we are at the moment. So most Indian cities do fall below the recommended per capita to open space, and many of you are absolutely right. URDPFI recommends 10 to 12 square meters of open space per person. I mean, look at the values here. Delhi definitely is doing so much better, but the other Indian cities and also metros are falling way below, the recommended, open space. Again, the main reason for this is also urban expansion and the built-up footprint. Next slide, please. So the current urban greening challenges literally stems from this data point, right? Like when we have shrinking open space, now where do we then even think about urban greening, right? So the three case studies that we are going to present today, the major challenge that we are all facing can be bucketed under these four, pillars. One, all our cities are, seeing unprecedented urban growth, which leads to reduction of open spaces. Two, even the little space that we have, there's a lack of imagination of how to use these spaces. Not everything needs to be a park or a forest. Third thing, there is definitely a lack of data and scientific method to approach site selection and planting. And of course, community has never been involved in a lot of these planning and planting processes. It has always been, a city's green goal that has always been met. So yeah, next slide. Now, with all of this as a context of where we are, in terms of our vulnerabilities and what are our challenges when it comes to urban greening, we, for this masterclass, want to really explore and introduce this concept called as Mapathon, which is essentially a citizen science tool that combines geoinformatics and data to communities. And how do we then really understand and identify open spaces that can then be used for anything? It could be for urban greening, it could be for any blue-green infrastructure in general. So Mapathon itself has three large objectives. One is how do we use evidence and which is scientific data through geoinformatics and local knowledge, and then also involve the communities as partners and stakeholders into the planning process. And the end goal of this is to really create a repository of open spaces that are potential for any form of blue-green intervention. For this masterclass, yes, all of our interventions are focused towards urban greening. But our journey started way, earlier. WRI and FAU had put together this document called as Mapping Together, where Mapathon was literally used as a mapping tool to identify for trees outside forest for restoration. That is the purpose of the Mapathon when it started. It was a global framework. And WRI itself, Mapathon, this is not the first Mapathon. We have conducted Mapathon in 2017 in Madhya Pradesh. But having said that, today we are talking about Kochi, Bangalore, and Mumbai in the last 4-5 years. The process is basically you have a pre-Mapathon, which is basically to select where you're doing your Mapathon, how are you using your geoinformatics to understand and analyze vulnerabilities. Then how do you collect data, which is where the approaches differ from city to city, and how do you consolidate this data into a repository for results. Next slide. The stakeholders can be four, types. One, you will have your public department. So when we are talking about stakeholders, it's also important to understand who is owning the process. In each of the city, the stakeholders and the owner were very different. But basically, you do have your public departments, mostly horticulture, garden, forest department, or any other department who might be interested to plant. For example, in Bangalore, there's always this conversation about development and then compensatory planting. You might also have active citizen groups like RWA, CSOs, and Apartment Federation who can take Mapathon as a tool to identify and plant in their communities, local volunteers, residents, and also CSR initiatives. So basically, these are the four buckets that the stakeholders fall into. Next slide, please. With this, we are trying to solve three things. One, we are identifying neglected and underutilized open spaces that can then become a tool to build climate resilience through urban greening. Two, we are also trying to bridge gap between local insights and lived knowledges to larger implementation strategy that the city might have. The third one is to really make urban greening efforts backed by evidence and science, and not just availability of space alone. Next slide, please. So with this, we'll go into the three cities that we're talking about, three cities and three approaches. Again, the approach here is mostly from how did we collect data and what did we do with the data, depending on the ecosystem. And we'll start with Kochi and then we'll wind up or wrap it up with Mumbai. I'll pass it to Linda to take over for the Kochi component. Linda, over to you.
Thanks, Arun. Uh, hi everyone. Today I'll be presenting Kochi's journey, how a citizen-led Mapathon became the foundation for Kawaki, a city-wide nature-based solutions program that's now part of the Kochi's official resilience strategy. The story shows how geospatial data, community engagement, and local governance can transform climate vulnerability into an opportunity. So Kochi, Kerala's financial capital and port city, sits less than 5 meters above the sea level, making it highly vulnerable to sea level rise, tidal flooding, and erosion. Several parts of the city face repeated flooding and waterlogging due to high tides and poor drainage. Rising urban temperature add another layers of stress. So when we say communities at risk, we are talking about daily realities of people living adjacent to lakes, canals, and coast who face the twin threats of heat and flood. Next slide, please. To address these challenges, WRI-India and Kochi Municipal Corporation adopted a multi-pronged approach. So data-driven decision-making using satellite data, spatial mapping, and citizen inputs, multi-stakeholder processes, bringing together municipal departments, academic institutions, NGOs, and community groups, then institutional integration, aligning actions with city disaster management plan, increasing access to finance by linking local actions to global climate funding opportunities, economic analysis of natural infrastructure by recognizing the values of trees and wetland as climate assets, then long-term preparedness through nature-based solutions, then localized disaster preparedness built through strong community networks. This approach connected short-term interventions to long-term resilience planning, actually. Next slide, please. Through geospatial analysis, we found that 31% of Kochi's population is regularly exposed to temperature above 30 degrees Celsius. 26% of the residents live within floodplains. Now we overlaid heat maps with flood. Next slide, please. Sorry. So now we overlaid heat maps with flood exposure and access to public spaces. We found something striking, like the most vulnerable populations, often in low-income wards, had poor access to cool green spaces, but high exposure to heat and flood. This meant that the restoring green cover was not just about beautification, it was about climate justice. Like if you see, this composite map shows how vulnerability overlaps. Like you see, like there are places where reds, for the vulnerability maps, reds are there for both the maps. If you connect it with the green space, the green space is lower in that zones. That's how we have prioritized the locations for our planting also. Next slide, please. Next step was the action, the Kochi Mapathon, launched in 2020. Our goal was to assess the city's spatial baseline, how many trees existed, where gaps were, and what potential sites were available for restoration. We used the Collect Earth, a free and open source platform by FAO, Open Forest Initiative. It allowed participants to assess landscape using a very high resolution satellite imagery from Google Earth and Bing's map integrated with Google Earth engine. Then come who participated. Students from St. Teresa's College, then Kerala Agriculture University and Mukombika Technical Campus were trained in data collection. Ward councillors, resident welfare association members, and local experts contributed their on-ground knowledge also. Together, they built Kochi's first community-sourced green cover map, blending science and citizen participation. Next slide. In Collect Earth, each data point was recorded through standardized survey cards. Volunteers assessed details like canopy density, land use, ownership type, and restoration feasibility. This citizen-generated data provided a clear and quantifiable baseline for the city, helping the planners and WRI identify priority zones for greening interventions. The power of this method was its replicability. applicability. Like other Indian cities like Bengaluru and Mumbai have something adopted from this for their similar citizen mapathons. Next slide, please. Then solutions at a scale. Like from these insights, we proposed a scalable set of interventions, 5 models for urban greening suited for Kochi's landscape, like avenue planting, like trees along roads to reduce the heat and dust, perimeter planting around institutions, schools, and public facilities, block planting, small clusters of native trees in vacant lands, community and home gardens or rooftops to maximizing green cover in dense neighborhoods, then waterway planting like stabilizing canal banks and improving the water infiltrations. These ideas directly came from the spatial and the community data, enabling context-specific nature-based solutions. Next slide. All these, like the first phase identified around 2,900 trees across 9 wards, and this became the initial Kawaki sites where citizens, Kutumbashree groups, and the students planted native species. Every site was planted to address a specific vulnerability, like some targeted flood-prone marshland, others focused on like heat islands with no shade or green cover. So this was Kawaki, from mapping to action, the Kawaki initiative. In 2021, the Kochi Municipal Corporation actually formally launched Kawaki, meaning to make a grove in Malayalam. With technical support from WRI-India and under Cities for Forest program, what started as a Mapathon exercise or evolved into a citywide urban forest program. Like Kawaki sites were designed to act as cooling islands, rainwater sinks, community spaces. The first Kawaki site at Edward Memorial School in Fort Kochi actually transformed a waste-laden marsh into a thriving forest of around 100 plus species, native species. And by 2022, Kochi had established over 10 Kawaki sites across its most heat and flood stressed wards. Next slide, please. The key strength of Kawaki was its community ownership model. Like there was livelihood and community engagement along with it. The Kudumbashree group, Women's Hoop, they are a self-help group in women's self-help group in Kerala. They led the site preparation and planting, earning wages under urban employment guarantee scheme. Students became the site stewards, labeling saplings with QR codes for tracking, etc. And differentially abled residents at Kotalango Brothers Care Home were trained to maintain their campus forest. And then the Residents Association ensured long-term upkeep of these planted trees. So in every case, climate action created a new form of livelihood, inclusion, and civic pride, I would say. Next slide, please. So these are some of the pictures of the planted trees. To institutionalize these efforts, Kochi Municipal Corporation and WRI-India developed a guidance document for resilience planning titled Shaping a Climate Resilient Kochi. It lays out a 10-year roadmap with 3 ties, like immediate measures, like within less than 1 year, mapping open spaces and forming community groups. Then it had preparedness action, like for around 1 to 3 years, for developing a knowledge hub and restoring green infrastructure. Then it had long-term planning also for 3 to 10 years, embedding NbS into Kochi master plan and creating other jobs. So this document also is a part of Kochi's disaster management plan and also Kochi's master plan 2040. So this was the story of Kochi. I would like to give this to Arun so then he can talk about Bangalore. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. So, Bangalore's story is a little different. That is why our approach is also a little different. While Kochi had a lot of problems in terms of the erosion and the coast, this is Bangalore's problem. The image on the GIF that you see is the built-up story of Bangalore from the 1990s up to 2015. It sees a increase in built-up area of 170%. That's how much the city has grown. Next slide. And this unprecedented built-up growth in the last 15-20 years also saw that 85% of Bangalore's floodplains are encroached upon built-up spaces as well. This study comes from our urban blue-green conundrum piece. Yeah, next slide. This is also some data that we pulled from the Bangalore Climate Action Plan, where each Bangalore, now I think with the Greater Bangalore Authority, the jurisdictions are very different. But earlier it had 8 zones, and this is like the data set for the different canopy cover and the percentage of loss, vegetation loss that we have seen over a period of, 4-5 years rather. Yeah, next slide. So with all of this, the interesting fact is the city was already aware of a lot of these problems. So Mapathon then becomes like a sweet spot to, understand and address these things. The city had a very good roadmap called as a Bangalore Climate Action and Resilience Plan, BCAP. With this launch in November of 2023, they also formulated a climate action cell dedicated to oversee the implementation of the climate action plan with a special commissioner. And they also had a new campaign called Blue Green Uru. So the story is like Bangalore is the Silicon City of India, but it was also a garden city not so long ago. Now, how does the story get back to the garden city of Bangalore that it originally was, thereby to really instill the pride of blue and green in the residents of the city, and also join the Cities for Forests, which is a global alliance of cities all across the globe to understand and restore green spaces all around. Yeah, next slide. So there are a lot of sectors under BCAP, 7 sectors under BCAP. One of that was pertaining to urban greenery. So the city commits to raise the tree canopy cover by 10% in the next 5 years and 20% by 2020. I think it was wrong. I think 2040 is the right year. It also wants to expand the green cover by 40% and increase the green cover to 6 square meters per capita from current 2.2. Next slide, please. So with respect to Bangalore Mapathon, it's very similar to what Linda explained in terms of assessing the vulnerabilities. So the step one was to understand who your stakeholder was. In our context, since we already had a dedicated climate action cell, they became the owner of the process. And under them, we had forest, horticulture and lake departments and a lot of residents from the zone that we did the Mapathon with CSOs and RWAs. In terms of the vulnerability assessment, we did similar tests like Kochi in terms of land surface temperature, urban flood, potential for water recharge, and also vegetation trend. What is interesting is not the assessment in itself, but the inferences that each of these cities had. So in our case, while we ran the test through the entire city, we understood that Bommanahali zone within Bangalore was more vulnerable to a lot of climate risk, where this specific map shows that 40% of Bommanahali residents are in flood risk zones. And of course, the last part is to really conduct the Mapathon itself. Next slide. In conducting the Mapathon, we first identified, the zone in which we wanted to do, which is through the vulnerability assessment and all of that. Then the procedure goes into collecting the data, consolidating the data, and assessing and verifying until we plant. Next slide. So if you're zooming into each of this, the first one, the identification of, potential planting site happened in 2 manners. One, just by the mere virtue of running the machine learning, we identified open spaces that were within the zone itself. So all the green pockets that you see are locations identified from land use data through machine learning, which formed as a base map for us to even have a conversation with the community. Next slide, please. But then the actual identification also happened through the collection of the data itself. So in Bangalore Mapathon, there was a little difference when it comes to collecting of the data, where we had 2 methods. One is the hands-on method of collecting data, where we printed the entire Bommanahali zone into big room size map where people can walk on it, sit on it. The smaller labels and stickers that you see are the different typologies of green that could happen, which Linda mentioned, like avenue, green roofs, and so on and so forth. A lot of this were building trust with the community, having conversations, and really, embedding the lived-in experiences of community of where to plant, what to plant. Next slide, please. Then the second method was, the digital mapping method, which is very similar to what Linda mentioned from Kochi, where we did use Google Earth Pro and Collect Earth to, asking participants to fill in decided samples and surveys. Next slide. So the questions are very similar to what Linda showed in the earlier model as well. So basically we had 50 sample, grids, and each of these grids, have a sample question, survey questions like this, and participants were, asked to, fill in these grids in the digital method. So these were the two methods. And in Bangalore, people were much more open to share information and excited to do the hands-on method of the mapping through physical maps than the digital method. Yeah, next slide, please. Then the next slide is like you identify where you want to focus your Mapathon on through geoinformatics and all of that. Then you collect data from the community through hands-on or from digital methods. Then the next step is to really consolidate this data. So here we just made a Excel sheet, and this was an Excel sheet that was also given to the climate action cell and the forest department to plant for the specific monsoon. With basic details for the RFOs to go and verify the site. So one thing that I want to understand or also note in Bangalore is like while the Mapathon identified open spaces, the feasibility of it and the ownership verification still lied with whoever was initiating the process. In this mode, it was the climate action cell. So the climate action cell then verified whether all the locations can be planted or what can be planted. The bottom two maps are the left-hand side are the locations that the community has identified, and the right-hand side map is through the machine learning that I just spoke a little earlier. Next slide, please. So once we had all of this and consolidated this, even for us to prioritize where you want to do urban greening first, it only makes sense if the story is complete with the climate, risk, right? So those climate risk vulnerability assessment that we map through flood and land surface temperature for urban heat, we kind of overlapped the locations where the community said that they needed urban greening onto that. And surprisingly, a lot of the data points, the green data points that you see are either along the flood risk zone or somewhere in the vicinity through lived experience. Next slide, please. And this is the same points that were superimposed on the land surface temperature model as well. Next, sir. Then the last part is literally before planting to assess and verify, and then give it to tender for contractors. And this is where I think even our upcoming urban greening SOP also sits into where, while we have a lot of these systems in place, the actual implementation is where a lot of, unscientific methods come into place, while Mapathon helps you to identify the places. Next slide, please. And then the last part is to really involve the community that helped you to begin all the conversation. So the entire thing is to keep the community in the center and also backed by evidence and data. Next slide. So together we mapped more than 200 hectares of open space in one of the most densely built up, zones of Bangalore. And this led to almost 8,000 saplings last monsoon. Again, the question is every year Bangalore asks, where do I plant? And Mapathon then became like a tool for Bangaloreans to know where to plant so that the efforts are much more streamlined. Next slide. We also, developed a few resources, which I think, Shaurya, if you can put it on the chat, it would be helpful. One is to really put a lot of these learning into a guidebook that helps communities to conduct their own Mapathon. And I'm very particular not to use the word empower because community is at the heart of everything. And I don't think any of us are empowering anyone. We are just giving tools for people to take decisions. That is all. Then the other thing, Bangalore with its technology and the smart city, we also had this opportunity to develop a virtual Mapathon, which could be an all year round Mapathon for people to identify potential planting sites. And this repository again goes to the Climate Action Cell and the Forest Department every year. And this site is hosted by the Smart City portal for citizens to log in whenever they want at the comfort of their homes. Next slide. I think that's about it from Bangalore. Over to Sayali for Mumbai. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Arun. I hope I'm audible, Rohit.
Yeah, Sayali.
Okay, perfect. Great. So, Rohit and I will be taking you through the Mapathon we conducted for Mumbai in the H East Ward. So, this is a photo from the induction day of the Mapathon. We did this in collaboration with TIS and the Geography Department at Mumbai University. So, around 43 master students conducted this Mapathon over a period of about 15 or 16 days. Next slide. Okay, so again, before we jump into the actual Mapathon process, just like Linda and Arun gave us some background on sort of how we arrived at the location of the Mapathon and the objectives of each Mapathon. So a few years ago, we published the vulnerability assessment, or the CHVA, as we like to call it, for Mumbai, which was a way to assess the present day condition of Mumbai in terms of climate risk. And this report in turn fed into the climate action plan for the city, which then set some planning guidelines for climate resilience. So the kind of next step in this progression was for us to take these planning guidelines and put them into implementation as projects or in some kind of policy. So essentially, that was the direction we were going in. So we were working with the garden department on this question of greening in Mumbai. And our assessment from the MCAP basically showed us this chart that you see on the screen right now. And it's a ward-wise comparison of the land surface temperature and the green in each ward, right? So you can see a general trend of, wherever the green is more, the land surface temperature is less, something that even Linda pointed out when she was talking about Kochi. So a bunch of different wards started showing up as priority wards, and H East was one of those wards. So Rohit, if you can just point us to, yes. So that's where H East stood, and that's where H East is on the map, right in the center of the city. Next one. So through the MCAP, another target that the MCAP set was actually increasing Mumbai's vegetation cover and permeable surfaces by 30 to 40%. And I think focusing on open spaces in the city was sort of a good way to tackle both these objectives. And, not just these two objectives, but if we plan an open space really well, then I think there is a whole host of co-benefits that come with it. We can improve habitat, so on and so forth. So we're all aware of that. So I won't go into detail, but essentially just wanted to talk about why open spaces, right? Coming to, how do we locate these open spaces in the city, right? So when we talk about finding open space in the city, we also kind of don't just want to locate the space and impose an intervention on it. But as Arun demonstrated, or, as all of the Mapathons actually are very community inclusive, we also wanted to capture the rich knowledge that exists with these open spaces. So knowledge about how they were currently being used, who was using them, what were the community's needs for that space, and then what kind of potential interventions could be sustained in each space with community stewardship. So we wanted that knowledge to kind of lead us to the solutions for each site. And that in turn actually went into the interview questionnaire that we prepared for the Mapathon. So the Mapathon scope was sort of, you can see the map of the ward here. And the way we split the ward into kind of 6 different pieces is just to make sure that we are covering all types of urban fabric that we see in the ward. So there were a lot of, there were a lot of public buildings and public residential quarters. There was a huge commercial area, BKC, if anybody's familiar with Mumbai. This big green patch in the middle is Mumbai University, and so on. So, essentially we wanted the students to split into teams and cover as much of this area as possible. Next slide. So this is the web-based tool that my colleague Nakul basically created to capture this data. So, students could access this tool on their phones when they went around. They could geolocate the open space that they were on, and then also put in all of the question and answers that they got from the community into this tool. Next one. So from start to finish, I will just take you through how the whole process looked. So we started with a day of induction and training the students about the tool. That was followed by 5 days in the field. Then we had a short session on secondary data checks using data portals like Bhunaksha. So this is again addressing the point of ownership that Arun was talking about, right? So this is a verification step that we kind of included in our Mapathon process instead of doing it afterwards. Then we had 2 more days in the field. And then we followed it by a data session where students got the chance to clean the data they've collected in case of any errors or double check any geolocations. And then the concluding session where students presented their learnings. Next one. So I will kind of skip this slide in the interest of time, Rohit, because we kind of covered all of this. But yeah, this is something that I really wanted to point out in terms of planning a mapathon, right? So there were a few key things that we really need to keep in mind. One is the actual tool creation and testing. Me and Rohit actually tested this tool on ground and had to make some tweaks to it before the students got to use it. Tool training for students, I would say that this is absolutely crucial because you are kind of entrusting this data collection to many other folks that go on to ground. Three is POCs to support the students on field. Fourth is the backend data compilation and cleaning. So again, I cannot stress enough on how crucial this was because unlike the other two mapathons, the data for this mapathon was kind of trickling in every day for a whole week, right? So in case we wanted a better data collection or we wanted the students to tweak the ways in which they were entering the responses, we had to kind of have that feedback loop very fast. And the last one was venue and planning. So I think that's about it from my end. I'll hand it over to Rohit to take us through the data that we collected and how we analyzed it. Yeah, over to you, Rohit.
Yeah, thanks, Sayali. So, yeah, I think just like building on this, right, the context which Sayali said, and one of the key sort of a distinction what we did in Mumbai was we went to the sites where students actually went on ground where the open spaces are, and they conducted those interviews with the people who probably use that open space or stay nearby that open space, etc. And it was like a very non-judgmental sort of an approach where it was not like there were already defined open spaces as per the development plan, but any and every kind of open space which is over and above the development plan and what is a legally defined open space or RGPG plot within the city. So what you see on your screen is exactly that, right? Where the students actually went and we kind of ensured that all the groups are covering different parts of the achieved ward so that we get a more representative sample set rather than just one location. And considering this ward had like a mix of informal settlements, universities, commercial areas, along with the Nala, what you see as the Vakuala Nala, which is flowing through between, and almost like 50% of the ward is actually covered by Mithi River. So in a way, we got more than 350 plus interviews and around more than 250 open spaces that were mapped. And why this difference is because we ensured that each open space at least has minimum two set of interviews so that it is not skewed towards one perspective. And the questions were almost like a range where you can imagine, right? Who uses that open space? How frequently do people use it? What do they desire that open space should have? Do they even feel any climate stress, right? What are the kind of environmental issues which they face? Can be water logging, or it can be where they are on the marshy lands, etc. So understanding and mapping those became a very central part. And over and above, we also then did an actual mapping of the open space plots that are there in the development plan and the repository which the garden department at BMC, who were where this whole mapathon was anchored, what were the officially designated recreation ground and playground plots that were there within the garden. We overlaid everything on one map essentially. And it was very interesting to then start understanding that how there are so many open spaces in the nooks and crannies of the ward which often get neglected, where there is a lot of potential which can be harnessed. And that is exactly what came out to this mapathon. And what you see on your screen is exactly the overlay of these multiple layers of the mapped open spaces by the students and the officially designated open spaces. And some of the key highlights from this analysis, so again, like the data was trickling in, we had a massive sort of a data analysis exercise that had to happen in parallel. So like the interviewees almost spanned like from middle-aged, youth, elderly, and one of the things which we ensured is there is a cross-sectoral sort of an understanding of different interpretation of open spaces, right? From what do women think, what do children think, what do young people think. That also created a different sort of an understanding that how people desire what the open space should contain, where we could get different opinion from one set of people where they wanted a play area, whereas other set of people maybe wanted a community toilet, right? And so that's the kind of diversity of usage we found and what desired uses what people actually wanted. So these are some of those, I'm just showing you like an onion peel of different sort of a layered understanding we tried to do. We also, one of the questions was, what is there any waste disposal that happens in that open space? Is there any sort of waste burning? Because again, AQI, we all know how Mumbai's AQI has been pretty in the poor condition. So trying to also understand where does this burning happen and what is the intensity of that. So trying to also link with the larger air quality issues along with this mapping. And some, this is just like a mapping of the kind of usage and parking and construction. These are some of the key sort of usage which we found in those interviews. And this was more on the ownership side. Now ownership becomes the central part of any sort of mapathon, especially like when you're doing around open spaces in a dense city like Mumbai where land is a gold mine, right? And of course, ownership also becomes very important to understand not just what is there on the document, which often people do not know, but what do people think. So that's why this perceived ownership, right? So, for example, when the students interviewed, so many of the community members might say that it's a private land or it's a BMC land because that's what they must have heard, or that's what they would have been told by the government officer. But then it becomes very important to also parallelly see what the documents say. So this was just where we found like very kind of equal distribution in a way, and many people did not know the ownership, and that was very interesting data. What you see as others as 24%, it's something where people are not even aware whose land it is, because often the land itself is like 50% might be of the railway, which is central government land, and 50% might be the collector land, which is state government land. So that's why it's also more important, and that's why this became very important parallel exercise over and above the ground truthing interviewing process which students did, where we actually like they actually went on this website of Bhunaksha, Mahabhulekha, and actually went to locate the taluka, the CTS number, and actually like the find the documented version of what that current space, who is the owner or the rightful owner of that space. So also kind of tallying that along with what people say. And then what we did was also divide this more than 250 open spaces which we had across these different sizes, because again there's something like a number based on our understanding. We did like small, medium, large, Excel, and it's like a language which we also follow in the greening handbook, which was launched quite some time back along with garden department. And how and what kind of intervention we can have in different scales of open spaces is something we are trying to build towards also then with this exercise. And I'll just take maybe 30 seconds for you all to read. This is some of the anecdotes which we had where when students actually went on ground to interview people. So I won't read, but I'll just take 30 seconds. Yeah. So just to end the this webinar, like and following by Q&A. So like we saw, there was Kochi approach, there was Bangalore approach, and there was Mumbai approach, and across the three cities, Mapathon essentially became like a tool and a method that responded to certain challenges. And the key challenge, of course, was climate vulnerability, but within that also the shrinking open and green spaces. And that was especially impacting communities living in informal settlements, living in like the marginalized communities, living in low income groups, etc. Right? And that was something, a narrative which we saw coming across the three cities. And a common thread, of course, lies in what kind of evidences do we have. Now, ground truthing for us in Mumbai became a very important evidence where people's version of the story became as important as the actual mapping digitally. And how do we then decide about greening, not just from a scientific point of view, but also by ensuring community needs assessment point of view? So just to summarize, like Kochi, of course, then in Kochi's case, Mapathon was the starting point, which eventually started shaping a lot of disaster management approaches from the nature-based solutions point of view. In Bangalore, there was already an existing institutional mechanism. There was climate action cell within BBMP, and then that led to a lot of leveraging of the technology, the existing city initiatives, the empowered local groups, the citizen collectives. That eventually became a part of creating this repository for better decision making, and of course, then converting those into a larger uh, process understanding where anyone within the city who want to do, they could use those guidebooks which were developed then for localized mapathon. And then within Mumbai, of course, the process was something where community was the key focus, like how we go to the people and where the open spaces are located, and then using a combination of tools of primary interviews and then also the digital understanding by looking within the existing portals of land ownership, and how can we collate this along with engaging with different partners in the process. So that's where I would end. So thank you everyone, and over to you, Shaurya, for Q&A.
Thank you so much to all the speakers for sharing those in-depth insights into the different mapathons. It was really interesting to see how the somewhat same tool took shape differently in each city, responding to its own unique challenges. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A box. To begin with, are there different tools created for each city based on open source tools, or does one universal tool exist? Is a question. Linda, Sally, do you want to take this up, or any of you?
In case of Kochi and Bangalore, the digital mapathons were conducted using the Collect Earth tool. It's a freely available software. So both Collect Earth and Google Earth uh, helped us creating like to conduct the digital mapathon.
Sure. Thank you, Linda. For the next question, focusing on Bangalore, why was only Bomanahalli chosen as compared to the full city? Couple of questions for the Bangalore Mapathon, Arun, Linda, if you want to address. What has been the response? And second question focuses on like what has been the response from the Kochi and Bangalore authorities? Are these maps being utilized for all cleaning activities? And the third question then focuses on how does a citizen or funder look at understanding the scaling up of this resilience tool to other risky areas?
I'm sure, yeah, there are a lot of them, but I think the first one in terms of why we chose Bomnahalli, the maps that I showed that spoke about assessing climate vulnerability through, heat, flood, and loss of vegetation. That was done for the entire city of Bangalore, and a lot of these were documented and published into the Bangalore Climate Action and Resilience Plan, which I think is available online as well. So the idea or the inference from the larger mapping exercise for the city gave us the inference that Bomnahali is one of the zones that are much more vulnerable to a flood, being the southernmost zone towards the slope. So that is one reason why Bomnahali was chosen, and there were other vulnerable zones as well. The idea is like we WRI-India as a technical partner initiate the Bomnahali zone, and then the climate action cell then takes it forward to the other zones every year. That's the idea. Do you want me to answer the other questions, Shaurya? I think you had asked two more questions, right?
Yes, yes. Do you
In
want me to
terms of
repeat
the
any?
no,
Or
I think, yeah.
okay.
The second question in terms of what's the response been, I think Kochi, Linda, you might cover. For Bangalore, I think, like I said, every year Bangalore wants to plant 10,000, 20,000 saplings, but a lot of them do not know where to plant, and it end up being roadside plantation that dies before the next summer. So this specific year, I think the survival rate has also been higher. And the forest department, one of the testimonial from the deputy conservator of forest was, it really helped them to take decisions much more faster and much more efficient. And like I said, the climate action cell was very much interested to scale this into the virtual mapathon, which is a year-long exercise to collect data, and also to scale this and redo this for other zones in the coming years. Maybe Linda, you can fill in for Kochi.
Okay, so as I said, in Kochi, Mapathons and Kawakis are now part of the city's disaster management plan as well as a master plan for 2040. There are annual budget, like they are also part of the annual budget also. So that's how they have taken it forward. And then Kawakis are still there, the trees are still living. So yeah, I mean, it's how they have been taking it forward.
Also, I think the last question, which is talking about scale up, like how does a citizen or funder look at understanding this to scale?
Yeah, I think we can talk from all the three cities. Like for Bangalore, the virtual mapathon is one quick and easy way for us to scale the effort, because conducting a mapathon itself is a resource intensive, affair. So then the virtual mapathon on the smart city portal becomes like a very easy tool for people to put in their information, and it directly goes to the climate action cell. Then the guidebook in itself is like a very simplified version of how to conduct a mapathon, both in terms of a physical printing or even a digital method. And I think last year, some organizations were also very much interested to conduct mapathon in different zones, like from CSR point of view. So that those are the two tools that I think had worked for Bangalore, but maybe for Mumbai and Kochi, Rohit, Sayali, and Linda can elaborate.
Yeah, I think I also kind of resonate with Arun, and also I think scaling up also is become it is very context dependent. Now, often to scale up, first you need to set a precedent in some way. And I think once there is some sort of a precedent setting where, and that's why we took WARD as a implementation unit or WARD as a pilot in that sense in Mumbai, where if there is a potential that is realized, and that is something which the larger objective then is to kind of scale this for better addressing the climate vulnerabilities which the city has. And if there are one or two steps that goes over and above Mapathon, where once we have a repository, trying to then zoom in into one or two spaces to eventually convert that into a implementation project, then it becomes very important sort of a precedent for other wards or other similar units within different jurisdiction within the city to follow. And I think that is a very effective way to scale up. But from just creating this repository perspective, of course it's more like a process to find right partners in the system who and right volunteers, student groups, creating those field work sort of a module within different masters groups, where like they then become like it's like a collaborative exercise in terms of purely finding the repository of open spaces that exist in any city. So that activity in itself, that scaling up is more like the process which we just showed, creating a much more grander version of this. But then yeah, scaling up purely from creating those implementable project is a larger task, which requires a very non-siloed approach in its larger intention. Saili, Linda, if you want to add anything. Yeah.
Moving on to the next question. This focuses on mobility infrastructure. Like, has this method been tested along mobility infrastructure to further assess the co-benefits such as pedestrian comfort, shade mapping, and carbon absorption potential? And then again, what are the spatial parameters or suitability criteria used to link greening potential with maybe traffic density or noise heat maps? Sally or Linda, if you'd want to answer this question.
I can take that, Shaurya. So I think in this process, I mean, neither of us have worked on connecting this with mobility per se. But I do know that, we have done smaller studio projects again with students where we have done this. We haven't really called it a mapathon and we haven't used digital tools, but just mapping sort of the any kind of pedestrian safety or assets along a street can be done in a very similar fashion. And just as sort of Arun and Linda superimposed the data that we got from the Mapathon with certain vulnerability analyses to then see, how the intervention that we are doing on those locations falls, I mean, actually helps in reducing that risk of vulnerability. I think a similar logic can be applied to the, I think, noise. Was it? What were the two aspects that were asked in the question, Shaurya?
Traffic and noise.
Yeah, traffic and noise. So yeah, I mean, traffic studies or any kind of noise studies that have been spatially mapped can then be superimposed with that data to address it. But this is just, I think, I'm just trying to relate how this process will translate to that sector. Yeah.
Can I just build on what Sayali just mentioned? So I think it's an extremely interesting question. But unfortunately, if you look at any climate action plans, at least the one that I know from Bangalore, it really doesn't specify noise as a climate risk, right? But having said that, it's also very interesting to see what these potential links could be, in terms of green and mobility. Although I think avenue planting is not very much preferred in Bangalore because most of the time you have to uproot trees based on the newer infrastructure and political landscapes. So the idea here was what are these spaces that are accessible and that could be more equitable for a long run than for avenue planting. But nevertheless, it's a very interesting connection for someone to study. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Arun. For the next question, we want to understand what happens after this mapping exercise. Like, we don't always have all community representation in the mapathon. So, post mapping, are there any steps taken to get the potential planting areas voted for by a larger community for the site? And yeah, this is the question that we have.
Yeah, I think that's
Arun,
some.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah. So yeah, that's something which I've just like answered in the chat only. Like, and I think just to build on that, because once we have the repository, it is like the challenge one. Like Mapathon, like while doing the Mapathon, it feels like, oh, now we have a repository. But then after we have a repository, we realize that, oh, challenge has just begun. So it's also important to then kind of figure different feasibilities of different locations that have been mapped. And that can vary from city to city and the objective. So for instance, let's say if we have 30% of the plots mapped under the local government ownership. So probably that might be a low-hanging fruit because if there is an existing climate action plan or some sort of a project that is already happening around greening or around climate sensitive intervention. So maybe plugging those plugging those sites which can actually create a easier sort of a institutionalization within the existing programs or action plans, and then kind of creating that demonstration might be a good approach to build on. And that is exactly the kind of thing which we all in different cities are kind of figuring out the next steps over and above, of course, realizing the large repository which we have. How else do we then zoom in and narrow it down from the lens of land ownership, from the lens of community buy-in? Because often, just want to kind of end on this, it becomes very complicated, especially in cities where land is always conflict and the ownership becomes a very important challenge. So often what would be desired at a city level, what should come up there might not be desired at a local community level. And that is also the conflict which needs to be addressed over and above just thinking purely from an ecological point of view. And hence, I think having those multiple narratives, layers, and scientific understanding becomes very important, along with, of course, the political will and the existing policies that allow us to do it.
yeah, agree with that. And yeah, Arun, do you have to add?
Yeah. I think Rohit pretty much articulated this whole, but like he said, land has been a contested space, right? Especially in urban centers where it's a commodity now. So then what happens is when we, at least in Bangalore, what happened was the climate action cell was not willing to make the some of these locations public because they also have sensitive information on ownership of land, right? So then it's something that we should also be working out. Like once you identify the space, the actual challenges around ownership, and a lot of our revenue departments are not equipped enough to have so much of information even at a city level. So then how does that verification look? How do we strengthen that verification? And of course, like Rohit mentioned, the feedback loop, that connects the verification, post verification, planting, and back to the community.
Thanks, Arun. We can take up last two questions now. So in cities where population density and access to green spaces does vary across wards, especially for vulnerable communities, so can density alone guide equitable green space planning, along with factors like accessibility, ecological connectivity, and climate resilience also be integrated to this evaluation? Rohit, Arun, Salif, yeah, this is open to all.
Yeah, so in the presentation, not sure if I paused on that slide, but one of the slide is actually the access to open space, which talks about it doesn't talk about the percentage of green cover, but what is the walking distance that you have to the nearest open space. So when we talk about this, then the question then comes as one is the whole idea of equity. Second is like when we talk about road, we always talk it as an infrastructure. But why do we not talk about green and blue as infrastructure as connected pathways, right? So then the whole idea of aggregated greening then comes into place in terms of, no space is too small to green kind of a thing. So then the question is not only on density, but it's also on equity and, accessibility and other points. Yeah.
I also
Thanks, Arun.
wanted to add, sorry, Shaurya, can I take a minute to add to that?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add, these various other aspects that come into when we evaluate green spaces, right? Or when we are I mean, I assume that this is also a process where we are narrowing down on a set of green spaces within this repository to then go in and intervene. So I think that is like a key question to ask is who is then going to use this repository to do the final intervention. So if it is sort of, a government agency that's overseeing over the entire ward, then questions of equity and something that already comes in when we look at vulnerability and risk assessment maps that Linda showed us, is the fact that some of these populations in informal settlements are going to be economically vulnerable to disasters and things like that, right? So that aspect is going to then come out through those maps and help us pick the areas where the vulnerability is more. So that is one. The second is, if it is not a public agency that is narrowing down on locations within the repository, then the initiative actually comes from the bottom, right? So from the ground, there's some stakeholders that access the repository and say, hey, this is within our reach to do, right? It's either a non-profit or a RWSA. So in those cases, I think it's just sustaining engagement with the community wherever that engagement comes from. But I hope I answered that question. Yeah.
Thanks, Ali. So just one last question on the Bangalore Mapathon. If there are areas that have been highlighted for future action, specifically in the city.
Right. So what we showed was planted in 2024. The 8,000 saplings that last year got planted. So I think for future Mapathon, Bangalore was planning to do it in Mahadevpura. I think Climate Action Cell was doing it. So then that becomes a new repository of planting for 2026. But whatever we had identified in our earlier Mapathon, I think more or less it has been planted.
Thanks, Arun, and thank you again for those responses. And also, a big thank you to everyone who has submitted questions. It's been great to see the questions that have been shared. So, before we close today's session, we'd really appreciate your quick feedback through an interactive Mentimeter. So, this will help us plan better our upcoming masterclasses. Um, it should just take a minute or two. You can also scan the QR code that is shared on the screen. um, on behalf of the India Forum for Nature-Based Solutions, I also thank you again to our speakers and to everyone who joined us today. Today's session really highlighted how participatory mapping can bridge data, design, and community action, turning greening from a scattered effort into a coordinated citywide process. Mapathon do show how informed participation can also drive lasting urban resilience. So we look forward to building on these learnings and supporting more cities to adopt similar approaches across India. Have a great evening, everyone, and also see you at the